Hi there, it's Paul Duvall, Chief AWS Evangelist at Emphasis and a founder of Stelligent. So in this screencast, I'm going to walk through a blog post that I published last week on automating encryption in transit using the AWS Certificate Manager. And so some of the services I'm using, of course, is AWS Certificate Manager, and this is a service that allows you to provision, manage, and deploy digital certificates or SSL, TLS certificates on AWS. And so you can create public and private certificates. And so you'll walk through a process in which you're going to create that certificate, and then you're going to assign that certificate to a CloudFront distribution. So CloudFront is a content distribution network, CDN, and basically it helps you improve performance by caching data at edge locations. It also helps you with, from a security perspective as well, kind of mitigating or reducing the chance of DDoS attacks. I'm going to automate all this, and so you can walk through and automate all this in AWS CloudFormation. So CloudFormation is a service that helps you manage all your AWS resources in a template. So you manage it as text, as essentially as configuration, as code. And then I'm going to, in that CloudFormation template, you'll be able to create a pipeline. So I've created this pipeline in the CloudFormation template, and then that pipeline then deploys the necessary resources. In this case, it deploys the ACM digital certificate, it deploys the CloudFront distribution, and then it sets up some of the other aspects as well. I'll walk through the different parts of the CloudFormation template, but things like S3 bucket, IAM permissions, code build, code commit. So code commit being a Git repository provided by AWS, and then code build actually, in this case, it actually creates the website. And so this is a really simple static website provided by AWS just to sort of demonstrate this process. And what it's doing, it's encrypting that data between the client and the server. So it's encrypting that data in transit, and then you're going to be able to automate this whole process. And so let's walk through the steps of doing that. So first thing is, of course, you need an AWS account. You need the necessary permissions, ideally like admin level permissions. But if you create a group that has permissions to these resources, you'll be fine as well. And so the example that I use in the blog post uses the AWS Cloud9 cloud-based IDE. And you can use this outside of Cloud9. You can use this locally to get access, as long as you have access to your AWS access keys. But in the example I'm using, direct references to what are Cloud9 directories. So you'll just need to make some modifications if you're running it locally, some other IDE, so forth. So let's get started with this. So first thing we're going to do is just make sure we don't have any outstanding references. You probably won't need to do this, but I just want to make sure that I don't have any. And then it's going to make a directory. I'm going to make this directory to store the files that I'll be creating, and these are the CloudFormation templates I'll be storing along with the website as well. So I'll make that directory. I'm going to create a S3 bucket. That S3 bucket's going to be used to store all those files, the CloudFormation template, or CloudFormation templates, and also the website files. So then I'll change the directory, and then I'm going to get those website files, just HTML file, CSS, basic stuff. So I will run these commands. Okay, so I've created the directory. Now what I want to do is create 3 empty files. These are going to be CloudFormation templates. So I just want to create those files in this directory. And so if we go here, we can see we have these 3 empty files. Okay, so the first file is going to be the ACM, the AWS Certificate Manager. And so you can click on this file. You can get the raw contents. You can just select all, copy it, and then go back into Cloud9, paste it. So let's walk through this briefly. So this creates an ACM certificate. So I'm passing in a domain that I have access to, that I'm managing actually through Route 53. But you'd be in this example, you'll need to use, unless you make some major modifications, you'll need to use Route 53 for your DNS in this example. But this is a domain that I have access to, so you'll need to make changes to the value for the default here or whatever you pass in if you're able to configure it in such a way. This actually gets called from CodePipeline, and CodePipeline then deploys this CloudFormation template. And the reason we're doing it this way is because it allows you to make changes without bootstrapping, without every single time having to create a new pipeline, all the new resources. In this case, if you want to make changes to ACM or CloudFront, you're able to do that just simply by going to CodeCommit, making some changes, and then deploying those changes onto AWS through CodePipeline. And then here's the kind of the key resource. We have the AWS Certificate Manager. We have the certificate. We're declaring the domain name that we're going to be using, where we want to apply this certificate to, this domain. There's a couple of validation options. One is email validation. The other is a DNS validation. So you can see in this example that I'm using the DNS validation. And so this is the preferred and recommended way that you validate. Otherwise, you're tracking down emails that are associated with your domain and so forth. The last key part I want to go over is an export value. So in my outputs, I'm declaring an export value. And so this is a reference to the certificate. And this is going to be used by the CloudFront CloudFormation template. So this is how it attaches that certificate. It gets the reference to that resource that gets created in this file. So I'm just going to make sure I save this. And then we'll go back. And then here, this is the CloudFront template. And so you can see there's a few changes you'll need to make. And so let's select all, go back into Cloud9, we'll paste that. And so you're going to need to make a few changes. And this is the particular configuration that I have here. And we can just verify this does not exist yet. Okay, and so this is going to need to be a unique bucket that you're going to create and that you will have access to. And in this case, it's linking it to the domain. And so I could put this at the root level. I'm actually putting the bucket. I'm creating a bucket called www. I'm storing the files there. I have a domain name. You can see, which is the kind of fully qualified reference to the S3 bucket. And then the CloudFront C name that it will use, and that's when I type that in, it's going to then direct to the CloudFront distribution. This is my zone ID, and so this is a zone ID I have access to. So you're going to need to make a modification, and the way you can do that is you can go to your console. Type Route 53, and you go to your hosted zone, and this is where that hosted zone ID is going. You can see that's the value I'm using. Your value is going to be different, so you just need to make sure that you make that modification right here. So as soon as you, as long as you make these changes to these parameters to the CloudFormation template, everything else should work. This is a reference to that. I'm using an intrinsic function in CloudFormation, FN import value. This is a reference to that export value that I had defined in the other template. And so this is creating that CloudFront distribution. It's indicating the minimum protocol, TLS, that we're using. We also define the domain name, the origin for the S3 configuration, how the default cache behavior operates, and then we're redirecting to HTTPS, so ensuring that anything that's going through CloudFront or this CloudFront distribution is going to be going through HTTPS, even if it comes from HTTP. And then here's where we define our records within Route 53. And so this is the domain name generated. This, you don't need to modify this. It's a default host zone ID that I'm linking to my record set. But this is then going to go into Route 53 and then make these changes to the hosted zone so that when I type in, when you type in whatever domain you have access to, then it redirects to the CloudFront distribution. Okay, so the last file we're going to create is the TLS pipeline. And so again, we're going to select all, go back into Cloud9, we'll paste everything here. This is about a 352 line file, so just briefly go through this. You're going to be passing in a parameter to this CloudFormation template. It's going to be the site bucket name. It's going to need to be a globally unique name that you're going to create. In my case, it's going to be www.encryptaws.com, so this is something I have access to. And then I create the artifact bucket. I create a number like IAM permissions. That's mostly what you see here. I create an SNS topic. I create a code commit repository. And so this code commit repository is initialized in S3, so you can see this code property associated with this. And so this is, I'm going to zip up all the files that I have here locally, if you will, in Cloud9. I'm going to zip all those up, and then I'm going to push it into this S3 bucket. And then I'm going to initialize the code commit repository based on the contents of that S3 bucket. And the reason we're doing it that way is because then when our first initialization or first instantiation of that pipeline is going to take that source. That way it doesn't fail because it doesn't have any files in it. It's going to be populated with all the files that we need, and then we can just make changes to the repository after that. And then we have the various IAM roles, IAM permissions in general. We have the site bucket where we're going to store these web files here. And then we have a code build project. This actually performs the copy of the related files and then makes them public read so that we have access to the website, index HTML and so forth. We have a pipeline bucket, and then we define the pipeline itself. And so the pipeline has a source, stage, and action. You can see it's code commit, and the code commit repository is based on that code commit repository that you saw earlier in this CloudFormation template. It produces these output artifacts. These output artifacts are a zip file that's encrypted, and it has all the files that we just pushed up to code commit. And then that output artifact is used as an input artifact in the build stage. And so we're able to define all that here. That's where it does that simple copy and makes it public read on the S3 bucket. And then here's where we deploy the ACM certificate and the CloudFront distribution. The way we're doing that is we're using CloudFormation as a deploy provider. So we're taking in these artifacts, we're running a change set replace, and you can see we're referencing the source artifacts that are in code commit, and then this file. And so this is going to be that file right here that we're creating. And then likewise, we also have a deploy provider for deploying the CloudFront distribution. So we create that certificate, we use the reference of that certificate as an export value, and then it gets pushed into here, and then we consume that certificate or attach that certificate in this CloudFormation. So then it runs this CloudFormation template. And then it produces an output for a pipeline URL. It just makes it easy. So once the CloudFormation template is successful, you can just click on a value. You'll see that once we launch the stack. And so we'll make sure that we've saved everything. Okay, and now we're going to make sure we're in the right directory. And here's where we're going to zip up all those files. And here's where we're going to just sync that up with S3 and then use that S3 bucket to initialize our code commit repository once we launch that stack. So we'll go back to Cloud9. Okay, so everything is up in S3. We can even take a look at that right now. So we can go to S3. We can see all the files got pushed up there. Okay, so now we're going to launch the stack. And you're going to need to make this one change. You're going to need to make a change to the CloudFront CNAME. So this, everything else should be the same for you. You're just going to need to make a change to that. And so what that's going to look like for me is everything's going to be the same, except I'm going to create that www.encryptaws.com. So I'm going to copy this, go back into Cloud9, and actually launch the stack from the command line. Okay, so we can take a look. We can see that it's already started. So this is the first CloudFormation template that's going to get created. And this is the CloudFormation template that has the IAM permissions, the S3 bucket, code build project, code commit repository, kind of the sort of basic building blocks of the solution. And this should take around a minute or so to actually get created. Once that stack is launched, then we can go to the pipeline itself. So we'll just wait a moment for it to go through this process, and then we'll be able to launch the pipeline. Okay, so now that the pipeline was successfully launched, we can click on Outputs and then just click on the pipeline URL. And we can see that it's starting to go through the 3 stages. And so we have that source stage with code commit. We can look in the code commit repository. We can see the files that get pushed up here. Then it actually builds the website. It makes that website available within S3. So there's 3 files. And then it goes to a deploy stage in which it then creates that ACM certificate. And then it deploys a CloudFront distribution. And so the whole process end to end takes about 35 minutes or so. And the reason is once it gets the CloudFront distribution has to establish edge locations and cache the data and things like that. And so that part takes the bulk of the time in the pipeline. So I'll pause it for now and come back and once it's successfully been deployed. Okay, so we can see that it successfully ran the pipeline. We can look at the history on the pipeline. It took, in this case, it actually took 25 minutes. I've seen it take 30 to 40 minutes in some cases. So it sort of just depends on how long it takes to cache that data across the edge locations. So let's have a look at some of the resources it created. And so we can look at the certificate. And so this is the AWS Certificate Manager, and here's the resource that it created. You can see it's the domain name that I have access to. And then it also validated that, and so went through a process of validating against the domain, which I gave the necessary access so AWS could validate that I have access to that domain. So then it issued a TLS certificate to me, or to this account. And then that part doesn't take too long. And then we have the CloudFront distribution that got created. So this is all the configuration that occurred. And so this is based on the CloudFormation template. You can see the minimum version TLS that I configured, whether it was enabled or not, what the root object was. This is all configuration that was in code that got pushed up to code commit. Origin groups, this is that definition that I define here, error pages, things like that. And so ultimately that's the solution. The rest of the blog post goes over this, and so we'll now refresh this, and we can see that it's got the lock. I have a valid certificate. So this got deployed up to S3 using CodePipeline, and then CodePipeline also ran those CloudFormation templates that created their certificate, then assigned that certificate to the CloudFront distribution that is the front for this S3 bucket. So it's going through the Route 53 DNS. It has their certificate associated with that CloudFront distribution. And this is really an end-to-end fully automated process for deploying your digital certificates on AWS using only AWS services. So if you have any questions or you need to reach me about this post or any other posts, you can reach out to me on Twitter at the handle Paul Duvall. You can also reach out to us at Emphasis at the handle Emphasis, and also at Stelligent as well. And so all this information is actually posted on the this blog post, but you're going to be seeing similar types of end-to-end solutions, especially in the security and compliance automation area and other areas as well in the coming weeks and months. And so thanks a lot for watching.